Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where everybody is today. I'm Jack Weldy. I am founder and president of Smartling. I'm delighted to be here today. We've got a really great session today. It's going to be very exciting. We're going to talk all about AI and how it applies to the language industry and what's hype and what's not hype. And frankly, I think we're going to do a little bit of myth busting. I mean, every article that you read, every story on the news now is about AI and about how it's affecting every industry. And I think there's some really interesting things happening with our industry, particularly around language AI. And so we want to get to the bottom of, what is that all about? What does that mean? How does it apply to me? How does it apply to my company? How does it apply to my customers or, whatever it may be? And so we got a lot of good stuff to talk about here. But first, I want to introduce the superstars of this webinar. Let me start with Olga Beregovaya, who is our Vice President of AI and Machine Translation. And I also want to introduce Andrew Batwash, who is our Associate Director of Language Services. Let me do a little bit of background on both of them. So Olga has been focused on language technology, in particular around machine translation and NLP for about 20 years now. And she's really been focused on how to apply AI and data and the deployment of AI and data to help companies to grow their businesses. She started her career in language technology, building rules and lexicons for rule-based machine translation. That's the old way of doing machine translations. That must have been a long time ago, Olga. And she's been expanding her career ever since and into statistical and then neural machine translation. She was the president of the AMTA, which is the premier machine translation association. And she currently serves as the vice president and technology program sponsor for Women in Localization and as an advisor for engineering leadership at California State University. So that's Olga. And I want to introduce Andrew Batwash. Andrew has been with Smartling for a little over 3 years now, and he's really helped us scale our company's language services business during that time. Now, prior to that, Andrew has expertise in business process management and in supply chain management, and has led operations at various different startup companies in a variety of different services spaces, but primarily a focus on how to employ technology to make businesses in different industries more productive. That's been very relevant to the language services space. Andrew also was an officer with the U.S. Army working in the engineering corps, and he reached the rank of captain. He was deployed to both Iraq and Afghanistan. So welcome, Olga. Welcome, Andrew. Did I miss anything, folks?
No, thanks, Jack. No.
Okay,
Nope.
good.
Jack.
All right, so let's start some myth busting here, huh? Let's talk about, because I don't know about you all, but I'm a little tired of hearing everything about ChatGPT is amazing, ChatGPT is terrible, everything is about AI this, AI that, and I know that a really hot ticket phrase and term in our industry is language AI, and that's a really, really important concept. And so let's just start with kind of a basic one. What is language AI? And Olga, I might throw it to you first, if you don't mind.
Okay. Let me give it a try. So obviously, as you said, all the conversations these days are about AI. And I think the best way to think about language AI per se is application of artificial intelligence to processing natural language. So in a way, we could look at this as a logical evolution of what we know as NLP, natural language processing. And the way I was able to explain it to myself was, here is operations and AI trained on the data, on performance data, right? And that would be the data that will help us predict risks, analyze project performance. And then there is language data, which we have tons and tons of units of. And that's the underlying force behind language AI. How did I do that?
Yeah, so I want to just kind of repeat that. So some of the AI components are around the process itself, right? Like how to make things a bit more efficient, how to make things more efficient, how to determine sort of the risk of either something on time, the quality, and so on, assessing the quality of the work. But another part of the AI is the actual machine translation component of this, or how are you serving up translations in multiple languages, as a combination of machine and human. Am I close on that, Olga?
Yeah, I would probably expand it broader, machine translation and other NLP applications, such as sentiment analysis, summarization, such as text generation now, right? That's the biggest buzz around ChatGPT. It's like, hey, you put something in, you say, give me this, and then you generate text. So yes, machine translation is definitely a very well formed and very well established representation of language AI, but I think we need to look at it way broader than MT this time and day.
Got it. I like that. And so anyone that is sort of thinking, look, when I think AI and the language services industry, or I think language AI, that means machine translation. Your point of view, our point of view is, hey, that's really not broad enough. There are countless different ways that technology and artificial intelligence and machine learning can be applied to make the language services process more efficient, way beyond just, hey, can I do a machine translation from English to French and so on? Am I right about that?
Absolutely. So I think we can expand it to multilingual language AI. How about that? So that captures the translation component.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Well, I think language AI rolls off the tongue a little better. Let's just stick with that for a little bit right now. Andrew, would you add anything to that? What are your thoughts about sort of what language AI is? Would you add anything to that?
Well, when I think about it, I think about it from like the service provider perspective, right? And I think when people talk generally about AI and AI systems, sometimes there's a framework where they want to say like this has to be fully automated, right? Like that there's no kind of human intervention, and the systems aren't really. It's the design is an afterthought, right? Like
Yeah.
you can design AI systems to have an effective and meaningful like human intervention, right? And I think like what we want to do as like a service provider in the language services space is really think about where the human comes into that human in the loop system, whatever that is. How do they add value? Is that value meaningful, and is it in the right place at the right time, right? To generate the output that the customer is looking for. And I think like the framework and a lot of the conversation, is either like, we're taking work away from translators and we're going into this fully automatic world, and it's you go down the path to the Terminator scenario, right? And that's not really what it is, right? It's kind of something that's going to be more in the middle, and those systems, in a lot of ways, like are going to help people be more productive. Their work is going to be more valuable. It's going to be more meaningful, and I think it's going to give a better output to customers, right? And the customers are going to obviously realize a lot of efficiencies from that kind of system. But it's like anything else that has kind of had technology put into it, right? Like the way your car kind of works right now, like you're driving a little bit, the car's driving a little bit, right? That kind of stuff. So, that's kind of how I think about it, like from a high level. And I think like we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, but we want to talk about where it makes sense to have a human in the loop in that system.
Yeah, that's great. So why don't we talk about both of those things? Why don't we talk about places where we can leverage language AI to build more efficiencies and cost savings and time savings into our processes? How do you, for example, how do you work smarter, not harder? How do you operate with less? I mean, we're operating in a world right now that has the economy is a little bit unusual right now, and I think every company out there is looking for ways that how do I get more out of a dollar, out of a euro, out of whatever currency you care about. How do I get more out of this? And so let's talk about how do we leverage language AI to build more efficiencies? And let's also talk about, Andrew, that says, look, is this eliminating all of the humans out of the process? And what does that mean? Olga, let me throw that to you first, please. Talk about some of the efficiencies.
Okay, let me. I think that what we are witnessing now is a huge paradigm shift. In the past, if you look at CAT, what's CAT? Computer assisted translation tool, right? We were talking about humans doing all of the heavy lifting while still seeing efficiencies, right? Efficiencies were there at the TM time. Humans doing all the heavy lifting and computers being to their help. I think where we can see most cost savings and most efficiencies now is it switched, it flipped. Now we can actually rely on AI doing a lot of heavy lifting. Andrew, not to forget your thought about and hold that thought about human in the loop, not to forget about human in the loop, but we can trust AI not completely, but way more. So now we're talking about expert in the loop as opposed to computer assisted translation work. And I think go ahead, Tim.
Well, that's interesting. You reminded me of every now and then I see a chart that talks about automation, whatever it may be, whether it's flying airplanes and whether it's people or machine flying the airplanes, whether it's self-driving cars, whether it's, how to pull products off of a warehouse shelf on a factory floor. And I sort of see 4 columns in these grids that say, first, the humans did everything. And then, and I sort of, my analogy to that would be, translating in a Word document or translating on a typewriter, translating by hand with paper. That was really humans did everything. Then it was the software or the automation helps the human. And I think that's kind of the cat tool right there, but the human is still doing more of the work. And then there's the human helps the software. So the human is helping to provide feedback and to tweak things and make adjustments and turn knobs and pull levers and things. And ultimately, it's the idea that automation takes over everything. But I don't think that last step really happens quite as often as people like to put in their fancy 4-grid thing. But I do think it's interesting. I do think you're right, Olga, that we are moving in past the phase of software helping the human and more of the human helping the software to provide more for the customers, to allow us to translate more content into more languages, to reach more people around the world. So let's talk about that, Andrew, a little bit. So talk about how you see, as a director of language services, how do you see humans today being a part of the translation process? Clearly, they're a critical part of the translation process, but how are human translators involved today, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think you're right. The shift has been pretty dramatic. Even in the few years that I've been at Smartling, we've seen a lot of the work transition from humans being assisted, right, by technology to technology assisting humans, and that's been pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
And I think like the places where humans add the most value in that sort of framework is really in assuring and conveying like important meaning, right? And we in the language industry we talk about terminology, we talk about style, and we talk about how to communicate to an audience, and some of those things may be very particular to local markets, and you want to have that kind of sensitivity. There are cultural sensitivities, obviously. There are preferences around gender, pronouns, and the like.
Totally.
And a lot of times, it's really important to make sure that the human is equipped with the tools and resources in that process to be able to deliver those important meanings, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what the customer is looking for at the end of the day, right? Like if you're localizing content for a hospitality company, right? They want to talk to their customers, right, in their brand voice in a way that their customers are expecting, and they want to be able to like specify those things and get them out, right? And in some ways, the machine is going to be able to help the human do that, and in some ways, the human is going to have to tweak some of the output of the machine, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a spectrum on kind of like what the solution is, what the content is, what the customer's priorities are, and I think these like human in the loop systems, you can calibrate kind of the level of involvement, of course, but what we want to be able to do is make that translator more effective, more productive, more consistent, and that is really kind of the benefit, right, of designing this human in the loop AI system.
Yeah, totally. I like that word preference that you used here. That quite often. Lots of services can do a machine translation, but will they understand your preferences as a company about your brand, about your style, your tone of voice, your, all of the other preferences that you talked about, and especially your terminology, not the 20 words that define your brand, but the 20,000 words or that define your brand. And are they using those properly? By the way, it looks like we've got several hundred people attending today, and I see a couple questions coming in right now. And I see one that's relevant to this one. So by the way, keep your questions coming and we'll kind of take them a little bit at a time here. This one related to that topic says, hey, how do companies like Smartling compete with cloud, it looks like cloud MT providers like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon? And Olga, I know you have some strong opinions on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how Smartling operates with and either cooperates or competes with other third-party MT providers.
Absolutely. And Jack, as you know, brevity is not my forte, so please stop.
We only have 3 hours for this session today, Olga. All right.
First of all, Andrew, you mentioned travel and hospitality, and I think that's going to tie directly into how we compete, collaborate, and work together with like API providers. We had an instance in travel and hospitality industry where machine translation, not custom, but generic machine translation, translated walk-ins welcome, as in a person walking into the room is very welcome, which is absolutely not the case, right? And I think that would probably help us maybe frame a little bit my answer as far as how do we collaborate. Of course, you can get a lot of awesome results with neural machine translation with cloud service providers such as Amazon, Google, DeepL, and so on and so forth. But if you think about it in broader and a grander scheme of things, what is Smartling? Cloud translation, cloud global content management platform. So first and foremost, we do integrate with a lot of best-in-class machine translation engines. But what do we do on top of it? We make sure that walk-ins are exactly what they're supposed to do. Right? So first and foremost, we have tools to customize, either just using glossaries or terminology, style guides. That's still where probably cloud engines will fall a little bit short. So taking all the linguistic assets and use them in the platform environment. And on top of that, use AI to select the best performing engine for this specific language and content combination. So I think the answer is there is no competition. We collaborate. And we really make the best of what we can do with public APIs and augment it with a lot of Smartling AI secret sauce.
Yeah, that's great. And I might just keep it with you for just a minute here, Olga, because you reminded me of something, is that quite often when Smartling talks to, look, this whole language AI thing is fairly new. And 10 years ago, many companies were not willing to experiment with, pre-neural MT and before engines could be trained and could take advantage of these kinds of preferences, your style guide, your tone of voice, your terminology, and so on. And so I think sometimes, when we hear folks that are a little bit, MT curious, they're thinking about like, hey, I might want to expand an MT. Quite often we either hear, oh, we haven't done anything with it because we didn't want to make a mistake, or, we tried it with a third party system and it didn't work very well. And so I'd love to kind of understand, how do you think, Olga, companies should be attempting to incorporate machine translation today in 2023, and especially the fact that every company wants to deploy more, and save more money in the current environment?
Well, I mean, first things first, obviously experience people had with rule-based machine translation engines when machine translation was at its infancy. If a company had those early attempts, and nothing against rule-based, it laid foundation to where we are now, they obviously, and even less so if the dictionaries were not customized for their tone and voice, obviously they got grammatically possibly incorrect structures, not accurate with terminology. So that could be one of the factors, right? They had one experience in the past, then go into statistical. Obviously, there was a huge leap, but still there could be, out of context, kind of quilted blanket of words. So one thing is we need to be very mindful of the fact that neural machine translation was an ultimate game changer. Yeah. So toss away the past experience. Whatever you knew up to 5, if not 3 years ago would not be applicable in this time and day. So come to it with an open mind. Machine translation is not what we thought it would be. What yeah, go ahead.
And we hear that all the time. We hear this all the time from customers. I don't like the output. It sounds like, XY, whatever machine translation engine, right? So there is that pejorative mindset when they think about kind of like these old legacy systems, right?
Absolutely. And the second thing is tone and voice, obviously. If the customer, it's very important for a customer adopting machine translation to make the decision, okay, do I just want to go with generic output? Or do I want to make a little bit of a time and money investment and really tweak machine translation to my company's brand preferences, brand book, do not translate, terminology, and really make it on brand for me? And that's another comment we get, right? I got output from generic engine. I did not like it. It's not compliant with our tone and voice. And I think it's very important to make this decision, customize with translation memories or just with glossary only, and be very selective about the content type. As much as neural machine translation is awesome, there are still things you do not want to do with machine translation. So design your strategy. Make the best of your linguistic assets.
So that's great. Let me ask you, Andrew. how do you see customers doing that today? How are they, let's suppose somebody says, okay, this is interesting. Like, I really want to embrace some MT strategy here. How do they do it? How do they incorporate these preferences we've been talking about? And do they just then translate everything with MT? Is that how it works?
No, I love what Olga said there at the end was design your strategy, right? Because you need to think about like what you want to accomplish and then have a plan to implement and execute, right? Because if you don't execute it right, and your plan isn't great, you're going to have a bad output, and you're not going to get the results you're looking for. And I think like from just as a starting point, and this is a conversation that we have with customers all the time, new customers, existing customers. What are you translating? What do you want to get out of that content you're translating, right? What's the return you're looking for? And then, what kind of solution do you want to put against that? And I think like a lot of times, what I hear from, we talk about this at Smartling all the time, right? We talk about speed, quality, and cost, right? And I look at those as more like supply side metrics, right? And like it's really important to connect those supply side metrics up to like your demand side metrics, right? Like what are you trying to do as a business right now? Are you trying to grow sales? Are you trying to grow conversions? Are you trying to reduce churn? Like what are your objectives, right? Because really like what solutions you're going to put in place and how you're going to measure the effectiveness of those solutions are really going to be driven by what your problem is right now. And look, some of that is obviously going to be dependent on, is this a new customer to localization? Is this like a customer that has like, several years down the road and they have different problems? Maybe they have a quality deficit they're trying to work with, right? It just depends on where you are. But having that understanding of where you are and what your goals are, is super important, because then you can start talking about, okay, is machine translation good for you in this instance? Do you need a transcreation workflow for this, right?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned before, look, we're all kind of sitting out here today, and you listen to earnings calls, you watch CNBC, right? Like everybody's talking about kind of downward pressure on costs, right? And so everybody's kind of dealing with that headwind, and to be able to be discerning in this way really allows you to get the most right for your money, and make sure you're applying it to the place where you're really looking for ROI, right? And like I said, it's connected up to like the business objectives.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so find out and determine what your customer's business objectives are, which might be selling more products, more checkouts on their e-commerce, higher gross margins, more partnerships, more hotel room bookings, more seats in airlines, whatever it may be that they're trying to. And there's frankly probably 1,000 others that are not, that are more nuanced and more subtle and more specific to that particular brand. And then am I hearing you say, then segment your content around, I think you mentioned transcreation and MT. Like, can you talk a little bit about the segmentation and about some of the benchmarks that customers use? Because it sounds like it's not just let's do MT for everything.
Yeah, this is a conversation that Olga and I have had with several customers already around, this content type. You're not going to see, discernible drop off in quality, right? You can reduce your costs. You can maybe improve your time to market here, right? And then you can either take that cost savings and do something else with it, or you can put it against maybe some like high impact content, right? And by having that mix in place and thinking about that as you put together your solutions, right, is really gonna allow you to either unlock new content or make sure that your localization program is really kind of efficient and adding to the bottom line.
Yeah.
And,
yeah, no, it's great. And because customers will then be able to, they will have budget available to expand more content that was previously untranslated, and they'll be able to expand into additional languages to reach more customers around the world on this. So I know translators are always kind of concerned that, hey, is this new thing, this shiny new thing, whatever it might be, going to put me out of work? And I think your feedback there is look, there's still plenty of content to be translated. In fact, frankly, there's more content than all of the human translators in the world could translate, possibly. And so there's got to be a way of segmenting this. I'm looking at one of the questions here, and I'll keep it with you, Andrew, for just a second. Actually, for both of you, AI is clearly going to play a big role in translation and localization. From a linguist's perspective, what new skill sets apart from, being an expert translator, expert in the language pair or pairs, are required to stay relevant and stay, keep pace in the age of language AI. And Andrew, I might start with you, and then Olga, I'll bet you have some thoughts too.
Yeah. Look, it's a little bit of a different work, right? It's a little bit of a different task to kind of take an output that's, semi-finished and adapted or adjusted on the edges, than it is to just kind of like generate a translation from scratch. I think like the things that we look for in our translators is, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, right? Is like, how do you leverage, right? We talked about like leveraging the technology, right? Like, how do you fit in with that technology and understand where to make the meaningful changes, right? And so, like, what is your focus area? Or is your focus area on, the terminology and the style preferences? Are you making changes that are adding value, right, to the content and the output? And that's really what like we're looking for, in these kinds of workflows. And Olga, I know like you were talking kind of we were talking earlier about semantic difference, right?
Oh, yeah.
And like how important that is. And
Mhm.
that's something that we're really interested in as a company, and in terms of like what value is the translator adding here? Is it changes for the sake of changes, or are these changes really like important to the meaning? And that's kind of where we started this conversation, right? With these AI systems. It's like, from a customer's perspective, they want to make sure that the meaning comes through, right? And they're reaching their audience. And that's really kind of what we're looking for the translator to do.
Yeah. Olga, do you have thoughts on the required skill set for linguists in the age of language AI?
Absolutely. So first of all, to Andrew's point, it's very important to train for translators to get training in dealing with the output of AI systems. And I'll probably go into a bit of predictions, but let's start with MT first. The training course for translator to post-edit RBMT was drastically different from the training course for a translator to post-edit statistical output. Now, in the modern time and day, I think it's essential for translators not to be researchers, unless there is curiosity around it, but to know the intricacies of the state of the art, machine translation, and AI in general. We know that neural machine translation can dream up endings of longer sentences. And there is something translators, for instance, now need to be aware of, the quote unquote false fluency, right? So in statistical, you would be looking more for like grammatical changes. The sentences, as now we know with ChatGPT, for instance, the sentences can be crazy fluent,
Right.
but completely irrelevant. So
Yeah.
being appraised, and I think, Jack, I think a lot of this work is also on us to make sure that the workflow and the CAT tools deliver the best experience for the to the translator, to make the best of what's in place, translation memory and terminology, but also make sure that we provide the right work surface for translators to avail of machine translation. Knowledge of state-of-the-art CAT tools, knowledge of machine translation, knowledge how to interact with a machine.
Yeah,
I think
totally. And again, with that 4-column thing we were talking about before, moving from the CAT tool that helps the software helps the human, and more into a, how does the human help to tweak the output and look for that false fluency? Those tools probably are going to change. I think we already see a lot of changes that Smartling has made in its platform based on those changes. I see a couple questions coming in here that are related to sort of, well, what is MT not good at? And so, Olga, I'll throw some of these to you. Maybe there are some things to not use machine translations for. Andrew, actually to both of you, because Andrew, I'm sure you see this with customers who are trying to segment their content. I've heard that MT is not as good in certain languages. Maybe it's only best with, Romance languages. Is there any truth to this? Can MT handle tags and things like that in HTML? So Olga, let me start with you, and then Andrew, any thoughts that you have on those? What's MT not good for? Where do you think it's running into some problems?
Jack, first things first, I'm really tempted to throw the tag question back to you when the time comes.
I'll
if you
do
don't
that.
mind.
All right.
But so the way we talk, Andrew and I, and the team, when we talk to our customers, we say, if you expect emotional engagement, emotional impact, you might not do that great with machine translation. And when we do content type analysis, we look like, okay, it's got to be inspirational. Machine translation is not doing that great with euphemisms, metaphors, irony, jokes are still kind of lost in the world of AI altogether. So when we see this emotionally engaging content, let's not go there. And obviously, transcreation is the usual suspect when you don't translate, but you really need to recreate the copy in the target language. So maybe Andrew, we can get that, and then I could speak a little bit if you have any comments on that, and then I can speak a little bit more about languages.
No, that's that's exactly right. And I think on the customer side, it's really about building the confidence, right, to get them to that place where they feel comfortable with a large, percentage of their content, having a machine translation solution of some kind applied. And from our standpoint as a service provider, that's been a challenge in some cases because you have folks who are very used to or maybe have a framework of kind of a different machine translation paradigm, and you have to overcome that a little bit. And so what we want to do with our customers is kind of help them build confidence in those solutions, and sometimes it requires some hand holding and to get them there. But in almost every case that we've kind of taken a customer down that road, it's been effective, right? Like they've seen the output and it is effective. And I think like Olga's absolutely right. There are some things that, you do want to have a human in the loop on for sure. But that doesn't mean that you don't have any automation in the workflow, right? And you don't have any kind of AI assisted, it's fully on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And we can dial it up and kind of dial it down. And that's something that we're able to do at Smartling, depending on the content type and all the other factors that I was talking about.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, I'll briefly answer the tag question because my background is in software development. Tags handled by how a machine translation handles tags is really dependent on the machine. Some are better than others, frankly, and frankly, some human translators are better at handling tags than others. And no one wants to translate a 20-word sentence that's a complete tag soup that has 18 tags instead of 20 words. The challenge is the nature of how languages, for example, that have the adjective before the noun. This is my fast car versus the adjective after the noun. Car fast. If there's tags around that means the tags are moving, to define some of these kinds of things. And frankly, some machine translation engines are better than that. What I would also say is that a good translation management platform,
right,
does an excellent job of cleaning and cleansing those, and then enforcing that, hey, the tags are properly supported, or identifying it so that the best translation in the world but has broken tags doesn't break your application. I think that's really, really important.
right.
All right, I want to move the discussion to data here a little bit because there's obviously look, this stuff doesn't happen by accident, and I want to talk about there's a hot buzzword around AI as well, around data governance. And, in order to provide a machine learning output, whatever it may be, whether it's image recognition, whether it's, translation, whether it's, some other machine learning application, you need a huge amount of data that the machine can learn from. So how should companies be thinking about that data? I mean, what I'm intrigued by is that many companies already have a large corpus of content that's ready for their machine translation efforts. That's called their translation memories, right? That they've been building for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years on this. But how should we think about data governance, Olga? Why don't we start with you first here?
Okay, great. Let's take data governance as it applies to machine translation. As you said, Jack, there could be volumes of legacy translation memory, but can it contain deprecated terminology? Most definitely. Can it contain single source with 4 different translations? Most definitely. Now, we do know that machine translation, or all of AI for that matter, operate on a simple principle: garbage in, garbage out. No disrespect. That's a known industry term. So making sure you get the best results of your machine translation application, one big part of it is really reconciling your linguistic assets, applying, and that's what we do here at Smartling, applying machine learning algorithms to really prepare your linguistic assets to be of value for machine translation application or broader NLP applications going forward, then actually injecting noise they will do nothing but contaminating your models. So I think as it comes to linguistic data governance, and there are good hygiene practices, right? You can run tests, you can run discrepancy tests between your terminology, and that's, again, something that we do, terminology and translation memory, toss away translation units based both on linguistic parameters or just simple TU timestamps. But it is all about good data hygiene equals good language AI. As simple as that.
Yeah, and as a software developer, I feel compelled to add, you also have to have the right security. You have to have the right scalability. You've got to have reliability. If you stick, a 2 billion word corpus of content into a platform, is it going to immediately choke and die, or is it, and is it secure? Because there's a lot of very sensitive data that's in there.
Well,
Let me add,
check this.
yeah.
I'm sorry. This goes back to what you were asking before about like how do you do this successfully, right?
Yeah.
And this is the main components, right? On the implementation side is to make sure that the data is good, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that you're doing the good hygiene stuff, so that when you do want to go execute on this, you don't have like a deficit of 10 years of bad quality translations.
Totally. Well, I was just going to ask, like, how do I know that this is successful, Andrew? Like, what are some of the measures of success that you look at? What are some of the benchmarks that you see, with your customers, that that this is working?
Yeah, I mean, look, we obviously look at like error rates, defect rates, right? We look at level of effort in a couple different ways, and we have some ideas about what's tolerable and what's not tolerable. And then obviously we look for kind of like end user feedback, right? Like and how does that track well with what how well does that track with what they've told us they want, right? And if we're tracking well with what we understand to be the requirements, and the level of effort is kind of within tolerances, and we're not generating a lot of defects, that's really kind of like what we're looking for.
Yeah, got it. Okay. I see a couple other questions coming in here. Is it possible to use context for content that's localized with MT? Olga, do you want to address that one? Is it possible to use visual context or other contextual information around this, or is MT its own sort of opaque box?
Well, it's definitely not its opaque box. Again, if we look at, for instance, Smartling, right, as a language transformation platform, obviously all the capabilities you have that are applicable to human translation, they are equally applicable to machine translation post-editing process, right? Such as visual context, such as seeing the segments before and after. This doesn't go anywhere. I mean, this experience, we only had one dimension, and that's a helpful dimension to the user experience, but everything else still pertains. Now, context. Let's remember that as opposed to statistical machine translation that operates in n-grams, right? Neural machine translation really looks at whatever the chunk of the sentence or chunk of text that is furnished in its entirety. So you get way more, for instance, capabilities to disambiguate homonyms. You really would know what an homonym means depending on the context. Now, obviously, since
Can you explain what a homonym is for the dumb guys on the call here? That's me.
Okay, Jack, I'll leave that comment addressed. But it's really two words that sound the same but have a different meaning.
Got it. All
and
right.
yeah, so that's that's pretty much it.
Yeah, got it.
And yeah, but it's also, again, Chuck, that's one of the reasons why I actually asked you to answer the tagging question and the segmentation question. Whatever the unit of thought is furnished to machine translation is as much context as you're providing for machine translation, right? If you feed it chunks of text in isolation, you're not being very helpful, right? But with the proper segmentation, obviously machine translation gets exactly what it's supposed to be looking at. So, but still, like, Jack, shall I throw a couple other linguistic terms?
That'd be great. That'd be great.
Okay, anaphora and ellipse, like still sentences where the following sentence is defined by what the previous sentence was saying. Like, say, Olga is in the room. She is, I don't know, she's holding a glass of water. I mean, those are still more challenging, but it's becoming better.
Yeah. Look, I'll put in a shameless plug that in the latest issue of Multilingual magazine, we actually talk about one of the ways that Smartling handles context, particularly in really challenging environments like video and gaming and things like
Right.
that where it's really difficult to get that context and capture that to provide it to the translator. And so there's an article that I was interviewed for Multilingual Magazine about how we think about automating context to help the translator, but it's not just limited to human translators. And so I'll just throw out that, one of the interesting things to me is, particularly in a software development world, you've got a lot of software developers all around the world that are contributing to a project, and they're contributing in a lot of different, they're all checking in code at different times. And you don't necessarily have this beautifully organized set of strings for the translator to translate and go, oh, I know exactly what's happening here. And one of the things that context does is pull it all together and at least present it in a way that says, hey, these strings go together, these strings go together, these strings go together, that in a mobile app, in a gaming environment, in a web application can be really, really valuable. And because, look, another area where I think humans have to be involved, and I think this is one of the skill sets for linguists, I think it's one of the skill sets for subject matter experts inside of a company, is review. And no one wants to review a big long spreadsheet of translations. They want to review in context. I want to see the landing page. I want to see the email. I want to see the mobile app. I want to see the game, and then be able to review that from there. All right, I think we've got a couple more minutes left, and I think we probably have to wrap up here. But let me ask you, Andrew, one of the questions here is, aside from machine translation, how else are you using AI? And Olga talked about some of the operational and process things, but can you get a little more specific on how we think about language AI beyond just machine translation?
Yeah, one of the things I'm really excited about. So Smartling, one of the great things that Smartling does is it integrates with all the places and software and tools that customers are creating content in, and right, and we can grab that and bring it into our platform. And one of the things I'm really excited about is taking that content and then figuring out automatically what solution to apply to that content, right? Based on what we think it is, right? And we can think about all the different kinds of buckets, creative, transcreation, product, application. Is this an email campaign? You can go down the list of things, but and that's kind of more on the process automation side. But really, what it does is allow customers to kind of take the lift out of finding the right solution, right? And you can think about how to set values and parameters around this kind of thing, but it's really kind of doing this solution application in a smart, efficient way.
Okay. Some of the things that Olga mentioned earlier, like assessing the quality of either machine or human, assessing the risk that something's going to be late, handling the tags, the question I answered, all of these, figuring out what is this really an XML file, or is it an Android XML file? Is it an iOS string file? All of these different types of things. So I'm going to see if I can summarize, because I think that's probably a good place to kind of summarize here. And then I'll leave the last word to the two of you, the experts. But here's what I heard today. What I heard was a bit of myth busting. Language AI is not just, MT. It's not just Google Translate. It's not just, whatever. Language AI comprises all of the different ways to apply machine learning and artificial intelligence to make the translation production process more efficient. And sometimes that means operational things that we were just talking about, risk assessment, file handling, tag handling, things like that. And sometimes it means machine translation, converting a source language into a target language. I also heard that the future of neural machine translation is not just, hey, I select from one of 10 or 20 different off-the-shelf neural machine translation providers, but instead we incorporate a customer's preferences, their style guide, their tone of voice, their preferences around gender and other inclusive terms, their terminology and their huge term base and glossary, and make sure that those terms are properly used and are properly conjugated in machine translation output. I heard comments from Andrew about segmentation and that customers are able to segment. It's important that customers can segment their content of what gets professionally human translated at a very high level. Let's call it transcreation, through MT post editing, through a trained MT output that includes your preferences. And we heard some comments about how linguists can stay current and make sure that they are able to participate in this process and add great value to their partners and their customers. And then we heard a little bit about, because all of this is driven by data, it's really important to have the right data governance about, do we have the right data? Is it cleaned? Is it appropriate for this particular thing? Is it fit for the purpose? Is it secure, reliable, scalable? What did I miss, folks? What did I miss in the last minute or so that we have here? Olga, any last words on this?
No, I think just we're at the most exciting time possible for language AI, and we want to be a part of the solution, right? Not deal with problems, but be a part of the solution. So that's
totally. Andrew, anything you want to add?
The only thing I'd say is, I think for our customers who are thinking about this, right, it's not an either or approach, right? You don't go from all humans to no humans, and there's somewhere in between, and Smartling can help calibrate, right, that solution for you, right? How much AI do you want to leverage? How much human do you want to leverage? And where do you want to leverage it to get the most return for your localization program?
Totally. It's not either or, it's both and. How do we provide the right solution for the customers based on their particular business goals, their particular business outcomes that incorporate human translation, machine translation, and anything else in the middle? All right. On that, I think we should end it. This has been great. Thanks to our terrific audience. Thanks to our terrific panelists, Olga and Andrew. Terrific, very thoughtful things here. Some good myth busting today. Thanks for everybody who attended. And we look forward to hearing from you. You can reach us at smartling.com. And thanks everybody for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.